All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, we're continuing our series on rigid mental thinking, but we're going to get a little darker today because how we talked about little ways it could go wrong, but
Hmm.
we want to talk about and we're going to get to a societal level on this as well, and how it can lead to brainwashing and how propaganda works, and actually actually hijacks that rigid thinking. You would think, oh, rigid thinking, you can't change your mind. No, it makes it very easy to change your mind. And so we'll go over that. So hopefully this helps you. And
Hmm.
we'll keep this one short today because we both got midterms this week. And
Yep.
oof.
Yeah, so my brain's a little frazzled and I have multiple dots that I'm trying to connect. I feel like I'll be able to connect it better. I'm going to tease because this reminded me what I wanted to talk about last time, but because we talked about masculinity, I thought, well, we should talk about Rand and his arc and, an example of masculinity. Well, Saturday, we're going to talk about a very interesting example in the Wheel of Time of this and a character that I think I didn't appreciate as much the first time I ever read through it, which is Eganon.
Hmm.
And so the great illustration of this kind of cultural brainwashing is when she first meets the girls in Tanchico. And
And I'm gonna just so people know who we're talking about because I pronounce it Aegeanin,
yes, I don't.
but at the same time, it's the Shanshan captain that you meet in book
Hmm.
two,
And,
that
and
captures Beldoman and takes him in and then becomes part of the
and
party.
and pretty much the first words out of her mouth when she runs into these who she thinks are these witches is, "You're not what I expected." And you know, yeah, because that's how it works when you actually meet reality, but two, to the underappreciation of the character. Kudos to her to have the intellectual honesty to go, huh, something's off here.
Hmm.
And so the real life example I wanted to use is Yoimi Park, who has been an outspoken advocate for um, not just free speech, free thought, free expression, because she escaped from one of the worst totalitarian states in the world, which is North Korea. But to make matters worse, she was able to escape because she lived on the border and she escaped into communist China. So things didn't get better for a while.
No,
It's
they got worse before they got better.
Yeah, and it's a hard when you listen to her story, it's hard to listen to.
Hmm.
Um because of all the things she suffered in order to get away from this, not just her own rigid mental thinking, but the cultural rigid mental thinking. And she talks about there's a let's see. Stop that. Why are you yelling at me? Um actually, let's just start with this. So she talks a little bit about this. There's a great from a couple years ago. She sat down with Dennis Prager and they had a couple-hour conversation. And one of the great things about PragerU is they realized, short attention spans. Let's cut these things up. Let's do little things that are easily digestible. And so this 2.5 hour conversation he had with Yomi Park, they've cut up into lots of little bits. So I just sent you the link, and down in the chapters, go to the one marked South Korea. And this she talks about what happened when she finally, because she escaped into China, things got worse. I won't go into it because it's dark. And then she was able to get into Mongolia, and then from there she was able to get asylum in South Korea, and she was flown to South Korea with some other um, defectors, escapees.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so this is her talking to Prager. Hmm. And you can see if you're just we should probably put the link in the
Mm-hmm.
description for those that are just listening. But here we go.
When I got to South Korea, they told me, oh, everything you believed was a lie. Kims are not gods. He cannot read your minds. They copy the Bible. They are dictators. And when I read the George Orwell's Animal Farm, that's when everything made sense to me. And that's also I understood, for the first time, the price of silence. And North Korea didn't become that way in one day, because the people who were in there, in the system, were scared and they did not speak up.
Pause it.
That's how eventually...
Okay, so I love that because, I mean, a couple of things right off the bat there of, I mean, it sounds so crazy to us of you you have to explain to these people that the Kims, the you know, basically monarchy of this communist state, isn't that a fun contradiction? They aren't gods. Yeah, because that can still happen in the modern world. And if all you know is that, yeah, you're going to believe it. But the other thing I love that she said there is why we have been crossing the stream so much lately, because it all made sense when she read Animal Farm.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You take a, what is, almost a children's story style of talking animals. And so it's silly. And yet, because it's not a lecture, because it's a story, because there are easily relatable characters, even though, again, it's talking animals. And yet, it makes it all make sense because you're taking these, what you talked about last time and the time before, these schema, and then but you're actually putting it into a context so that you're getting both of those hemispheres to work together the way they're supposed to. And I think that's why stories are so powerful and why they make sense. And to your point when we started off here, how it can also be used to go terribly wrong. Because that's basically why she believes that the Kims are gods, is because they tell you stories about them when you're a child. All right, keep going a little bit more here.
It came to me where I did not even know that I was slave. I did not even know that I was Asian. I never even knew what Africa or different continents, none of that. I knew nothing about the rest of the world. There's no word for oppression. There's no word for liberty. There's no even word for gay.
Your $200 puffer.
Quiet you.
Here, let's do that.
Again, back to Orwell of here's the practical application of controlling the language.
Why do regime get rid of these words is because who controls the language, who controls the thoughts. So if they get rid of these words in our dictionary, that means we don't know the concept of human rights. We don't know the concept of freedom. And that's how they can control our thinking.
Okay.
So from a developmental standpoint, I like to bring language into this because she said words. If you don't have the word for it, you don't understand it until you fortunately for her, you can learn that. But think of the difficulty after I think the cutoff is like 14 years old. When you learn a new language that has different sounds than appears in your language, you almost can't even perceive it, and let alone make the mouth movements to do it. That's why we have the tropes, I'm so lonely, right? Because they cannot hear the L. And they in Japanese have characters in their language that don't exist in English. And to me, it was impossible. I don't know how you did with it, but
Japanese pronunciation was actually pretty easy for me. There's only a few odd things. No, the one that's hard for me are the Southern languages. My wife, when we first got together, tried to teach me Vietnamese, and it invariably went, no, you say it like this, and then I would say it again, no, like this, and to my ear, it sounded like I was saying what she was saying, and then it would eventually get to, that's close enough, and I could tell it wasn't close enough, but which is really dangerous in a language like Vietnamese because there are like the word for grandpa and the word for penis are hilariously close and it's a very tonal language, so it matters how you pronounce it. But it's not just that, and this seems like a tangent, but I'll sock it back here and you can close that because that was all I want to show from that clip is, so I noticed this when I was the first few times interacting with my mother-in-law is I can't read lips, and yet I found myself looking at her mouth because even if you're not a lip reader, it's still information. So if I'm having trouble understanding you, like if we're at a sports bar and it's loud, if I look at your mouth, that adds to the audio cues because I know how the mouth works and how you make these sounds. I realized that the reason she has such a thick accent and such a hard time speaking English is because she talks back here in the back of her throat. They don't form the sounds with the tip of their tongue and their lips like we do. It's all in the back of the throat. That's why it's so tonal and that's why it's so hard. Okay. Well, for her, it's easy because that's how she grew up. What's hard is now transferring to a language that for us, oh, well, this just makes sense. Well, no, not if your whole life growing up, this is not only how it was done, this was the only way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to Yomi, back to Yomi Park's point, it wasn't just that she didn't know the words, it's there are no other words. There, there is no Africa. There is no the only other country that exists are the Asian or the American bastards, as she says, because that's the word they would use. In fact, when we send them food aid because they're starving, they are told these are reparations for us starting the war. Because when we send out food aid with US aid, all these bags of grain and whatever are stamped with the US flag and it says US aid on it. And well, so why are the US why is the US sending us food? Oh, it's reparations for the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I thought you were going to go a different direction with this because of the topic of
Mm-hmm.
fixed thinking, because what a step she skipped there that I've seen her talk about in other interviews is when she first got to South Korea, she wanted to go back to North Korea because freedom is scary
Mm-hmm.
and everything is basically you know your place, you know where you at. She said talking about being a slave. Yeah, but it's if all you've ever known is that, and then all of a sudden someone says you're free,
I had a
what do you
clip of
do?
that of her talking with Prager about it, where this is just a clip of her talking, and then I had some others of actually the back and forth with Prager, and he talked about that of because she used the word shocked,
Hmm.
and he said I want to go back to that. Let's unpack that. As she was shocked at
Hmm.
what she saw in South Korea, and it was scary.
Well, and
Um,
this is actually a great example, taking what I just said with the clip you showed me of how cognitive behavioral therapy works. Because when she was first exposed to the thing, it scared the crap out of her and she wanted to just go back to what she knew, even though
mhm.
she was a slave there, even though she was abused there, even though she was starving there, all of those things she would go back to because the new thing was scary. But then exposure that this isn't so bad, after exposure that this isn't so bad, after exposure that this isn't so bad, and now, okay, now you're ready to read Animal Farm. Oh, not only is it not so bad, this is how they screwed me.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's a great example of how elimination training and cognitive behavioral therapy work.
Yeah, in one of the clips that I watched with her talking to Prager, she said that when she finally got to South Korea, she was in a hospital for 3 months. And it wasn't just for the physical, because it was the physical because they have no medical system in North Korea unless you're connected, which she obviously wasn't. And so it was the first time she had ever been given a medical exam. And they had to make sure, because of all she'd been through, they had to make sure she didn't have some communicable thing that she was going to spread to the population. But then with the medical exam comes the psychological exam, because first they have to make sure, are you really a defector, refugee, or are you a spy? But then also, okay, here's all the things you think you know. And as from the beginning of the clip, there is none of this is true. And I haven't heard her talk in detail. I don't know if you have about. I'm curious about how that works Because why would you believe if I tell you this thing that you have believed all your life isn't true, why would you believe me? Well, how do I believe you? You're saying they're lying. Well, how do I know you're not lying?
Hmm.
So I'm curious about how the process works. And 3 months is a pretty long time, but not as long as your whole life. So, I mean, obviously there's a process there to try and break through that rigid mental thinking. Um, but I think it probably helps, as you've talked about one of the things that makes the US culture so unique is that our ancestors were the travelers.
Hmm.
They were the explorers.
They
They
were the
were
ones wanting to find new things.
exactly. And so even though, and something I think that is a credit to her, and I'll connect it to a fictional story is on Saturday is yeah, she had all this brainwashing, but somehow she intuitively knew this isn't good, this isn't right. So even though she didn't know the words for liberty or freedom or slavery or these things,
No, she initially crossed the river to find food, remember?
oh, that's right.
She
That's
she
right.
didn't intend to run away.
That's right. Yeah. So but in other interviews I've seen, she talks about how her father was arrested and given hard labor because he was basically engaged in commerce.
Mm.
Because he was kind of a scrounger, and so he would sell, mostly trade for food, things to other people.
Well, you
And
still have to have that a little bit of that in your system because
mhm,
I left to find food. Well, you have to at least have enough in your system to say food is out there when you're taught
yes,
food is not out there.
exactly. No,
Yeah.
you belong to the state, and everything belongs to the state, and we will take care of you. And if we don't take care of you, it's because you did something wrong.
Hmm.
And so there was still enough there to get away. Um,
I mean, it's not like we can't go way back in history and find this everywhere. Plato's cave.
yep.
Uh, this goes way back, and that's just one of the first written accounts of it. It goes, we could probably go to verbal history and go back to where we were barely speaking.
Hmm. So how do I pronounce Vagal? Is it a hard G or a soft G? Because if it's a soft G, my sense of humor
Vagal,
yep, never
like a
progressed past the
vagal
age of 13.
response.
Polyvagal. Okay, so I'm going to read from Martha Beck's book
Okay,
here.
yeah. So yeah, it's vagal.
So
This is the nervous system, the part of the nervous system that is responsible for fight, flight, freeze, faint,
exactly.
everything. Yeah.
So this is, explaining more about how this fight or flight response results in anxiety and why it exists. Something we've kind of talked about before. Um, so uh, when we get hijacked by anxiety patterns, we're dealing with literal wild things, sections of our nervous systems that evolved long before cognitive thinking ever appeared. Understanding how our nervous systems switch on various defense reactions can help us tame even the most worried aspects of our anxiety creatures. Some psychologists believe that the defense cascade is controlled by something called the polyvagal circuit. This is a large connection of nerves that connect your brain to other parts of your body. Poly means many and vagal means wandering, so the polyvagal circuit is a bunch of nerves that wander all over your fine self. Some of this system evolved eons ago in organisms you'd never think to invite to your family reunions. Other parts of the polyvagal system first showed up in early mammals. Then there are the parts that are unique to humans. These recently evolved nerve branches are essential for allowing us to communicate signals of danger or safety to one another. They connect our brains with the muscles of our faces and heads, creating facial expressions and head movements that send emotional signals without our having to think about it. This is why babies from all cultures smile when they're content and why most adults automatically smile back. When we're not so pleased, even if we try to act happy, a flash we flash involuntary micro expressions that last about a fifth of a second and reveal our true feelings. Our conscious minds may not see a micro expression of anger or fear on someone's face, but we track it subconsciously and may feel uneasy without knowing why. And this is how the individual rigid mental thinking links to the cultural rigid mental thinking because of what she said there in the end about silence of North Korea didn't get this bad. Heck, here in America where things aren't nearly so bad, but they're not that great, we didn't get here overnight. We got here because little by little nobody spoke up.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we were apprehensive and uncomfortable and confined within our own minds, the more we spread that to others because we are social animals, as Aristotle said, and we are taking cues from each other. So, my wonderful wife, who does not know how to be in the wilderness, and we're not even in the wilderness, we're in a neighborhood. It's just a very snaky place because of we're right on the water. There are lots of rocks. There's lots of snake habitat where my grandpa has a little cabin on a lake in Oklahoma. And we're walking along the long driveway that leads to the neighbor's place. And I'm looking down at her talking. I'm not looking at the road. And then all of a sudden she screams and jumps back. Thank you for warning me, honey. I don't know if I read off of her face or if out of the corner of my eye I saw something that my subconscious said, whoa, whoa, stop. Because I froze with my foot raised in the air. And when I looked down, it was about 2 feet over a moccasin.
Hmm.
Now, luckily, it had been run over by the neighbor. So it wasn't dead yet, but it had its back broken, so it couldn't strike me. Because about 6, 8 inches back from its head, it had been crushed. So luckily, it couldn't raise up and strike me, or it would have, because it was definitely close
I
enough,
mean,
and I was
6 to 8
definitely
inches usually does the job.
So
Giggity.
Even though the point being, that is why these systems exist. We've talked about this before, and in this chapter that I'm on, that goes into great detail about, look, it's not that these things that create anxiety are bad. It's that we are no longer equipped to deal with them properly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, her whole thesis is we have let our right hemispheres atrophy. And here a little later on, after that bit I read, she talks about the way this works. And there are some psychologists, sociologists who look at this as a red light, yellow light, green light is the way they explain it, is because your mind, that left hemisphere, notices something is wrong, automatically starts like a spiral fractal that's just spiderwebbing and spinning down, starts thinking about all the terrible things it could be and all the terrible things that could happen from those terrible things. It's your right hemisphere's job to actually process the information and say, no, it's just a stick. We're all good. But if you have let yourself get rigid in your mental thinking, then you hamper that process. And so that yellow light turns on, or worse, the red light goes to red, and then you can't act, and that signal never gets through. That no, green light, the traffic light gets busted in your head, basically.
Well, this one gets really complicated with that example because the schema, the left's tendency to make a kind of a heuristic out of it actually makes you more efficient at that. So if your left hemisphere was better at recognizing snake from stick, you would have recognized it even faster because you wouldn't have had to have that processing time because it would have already associated, okay, maybe there's scales, maybe the head shape versus just a stick, which is going to be uniform all the way across. Maybe there's curvature to it instead of just a straight line. So all of those things would be a left. This is why you can't ignore the left hemisphere either, because we need these schema to simplify life for us, especially as we get older, because we start running out of cognitive resource. and we become
Exactly.
more efficient. We need to become more efficient because we don't got as much.
That's
And
a point Beck makes several times is, let me reiterate, this isn't a bad thing. Your left hemisphere isn't bad. It's just it needs to be able to work properly with the right hemisphere. There's a reason we
mhm.
have two. There are animals that don't have hemispheres.
And the question is, what's the trade-off to trying to retrain our right hemisphere as we get
Hmm.
older? Because one of the things that happens, this is actually testable material for me tonight. One of the things that happens uh, as we age is we do rely more on crystallized memory. And so that's efficient. It's efficient, and we're trying to save cognitive resources. We're trying to improve our coping strategies. We're trying to be more have better efficacy in how we deal with life, and that makes it a lot easier because you can say, "Oh, I've seen that before. I've done this." Boom. Now the problem is, if you've seen that before, you've done this, and we've got new information, and that's a different story. Okay, what did you just send me?
All right, so this leads me to another little clip I wanted to show. We'll actually go out of order here because this leads perfectly into this. This is something I found just one of the few times YouTube actually gives me a good recommendation. And this is a clip
Who is
of
this? I've seen this guy before.
Jordan Peter. I don't want to say because I may be getting him confused with another Kaufman that I heard on
Andy
Williams.
Kaufman?
No. um,
Why
but
didn't
this
why didn't he
is
put it in the title or in the description?
yeah, because it's probably in the full one, the full uh, uh, interview. But this is someone named Eric Kaufman from September. Jordan Peterson talking to him, and just the first 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And the title of this video is "Why Young Women Are More Woke." And we don't even need to get into
Okay, yeah, I've
the
seen this clip.
female
Yeah.
part of this, but when he explains what this woke is and how it's different, it's very interesting.
Okay, so you said the first 90 seconds?
Yeah, 90 seconds to 2 minutes. You've got it muted.
Oh, yeah, that's because an ad came up right in the beginning. Here we
People
go.
always ask, what is the definition of woke? Well, the definition of woke, as I mentioned in the book, is the making sacred of historically marginalized race, gender, and sexual identity groups. That's it. That's the one sentence definition. And that is also what I would say, what I would describe as the kind of big bang of our moral order. And out of that emerges a kind of very fuzzy folk ideology, which says, so these are the sacred groups. Those groups cannot be offended. So anything you say that might be interpreted by the most sensitive member of such a group as offensive marks you out as a blasphemer. You're profaning the sacred, you must be excommunicated, i.e. canceled. The other part of this is absolute equality in terms of prestigious positions and resources between these groups. So, for example, you can't have a race gap or a gender gap in terms of the boardroom, in terms of admittance to elite universities and so on. It's got to be zero. So equality plus emotional safety, these are the two pillars of this ideology. But the point I make is this ideology is not some kind of system like Lockean liberalism or even Marxism that is, it is more of a bottom-up empathizing rather than a top-down systematizing cognitive thing. It's much more emotional. We're attached concretely to the...
That's the big point that, so I looked him up real quick. He is a professor and an author of politics and Canadian author, and so he's making the political point, which is what caught my attention, and I loved. I hadn't thought about that. Is there's a lot of influence from Marxism in. We've talked ad nauseum about CRT, DEI, and the influence of Marxism there, but this modern incarnation of it, I think he's right, and I think that's why it's so nutty, is because even Marxism, which is in conflict with, as he calls it, Lockean liberalism, the ideals of the Enlightenment that we take for granted now, it was still a system. it was still a system, a structure that was implemented or imposed from on high, if you will. This is a groundswell of empathy. And that is why it is so contradictory so often, I think, is because there isn't a scheme here. There isn't a schema. There isn't a structure. It is all just toxic empathy that swells up and then you act on it.
Well, I think there's more, and I want to say he talked about it some in the longer version, but this is where Lindsay comes across a little bit better as well, even though his delivery kind of sucks lately. But let's talk about cults because he brought up in that first 90 seconds we listened to that you could not even offend the any individual in that group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you are excommunicated. Another word for excommunicated is ostracized, right? I'm getting so much better at that word. It is ostracized. And one of the things that destroys us as human beings is actually being ostracized from the group. And it starts before that. So we brought Yoimi said silence. Silence is the killer. Well, when you're being brought into a cult, Jim Jones was probably Jim Jones, Charles Manson were probably two of the best examples of this in modern history. Is the first thing they do is get a little buy-in from you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how rigid thinking become can backfire on you because people who are prone to this are actually more prone to be converted into things. So you get a little buy-in, and then they try to separate you, and this is where the silence comes in. They try to separate you from external voices. So that's where the whole go away from your family. Manson convinced the young ladies that he convinced to do horrendous crimes to leave their families, which they were in. They were in bad situations in their families. They were in
Mm-hmm.
abusive situations, sexually and physically. And he was able to prey on these people by getting them out. Leave your family. Come to me. Come to me. Come to me. Well, what happens when you leave your family? That new thing is your family. And it's different to leave your family. That's not ostracization. That is you. Uh, that is your choice. That is your doing. That is uh, what do they call it when you're allowed to leave your parents because of an abusive situation? There's a word for it, legal word
Uh,
for it.
I think they call that
Emancipation. Y-
juvenile or minor emancipation.
Yeah,
I think is the
emancipation.
words they
Yeah.
use.
Yeah,
So
so
so you
you're
can essentially get
emancipating yourself. You have
declared an
power there.
adult before you're a legal, technical, by age adult
So that's actually an
because
empowering event,
yep.
right? It's an
Hmm.
empowering event because you made the choice and you did it. But now you're in this situation where, okay, now I've bought in. I left everybody, so I bought in more because I sacrificed those relationships to go in. I've bought in more, and now I'm in this thing. And what's the penalty for not doing the thing in within the thing? The thing they didn't tell you about before you got there? Excommunication, ostracization, get you out of here. Now you've lost the power and you're being pushed away from your group and you've got nothing else.
Hmm.
Now let's take that to a grander scale, and this is where some more Marxist ideology comes in. Let's go to like Soviet Russia, right? Especially in the early days. Your family could be spying on you. So you can actually force silence because you don't know who is going to turn you into the authorities. Yeah, you would say, "Oh, well, when you come down with the hammer, then everybody's going to rise up." Nobody's going to rise up if you don't know who you can trust. That's why we talk about low trust versus high trust. That's why we need to keep the United States a high trust society, which we're getting less and less and less of, right? And so when you're in a low trust society, they idolized, they lionized. It may be a fictional story, but it may be true. It doesn't matter. They lionized a child that turned in his whole family for hiding food. and the whole family was executed, and the child was made a uh, a hero to the country. And now, okay, so even if it's a fake story, you've got an entire country saying, my child could turn me in. My cousin could turn me in. My grandfather could turn me in, even though they got nothing to lose because they're 85 years old, right? So it's you can force silence, and once you've achieved the silence, whether it's people just standing aside or through means such as that, now you create a North Korea. Now you create a Soviet Union.
And
And now you
one
create woke universities.
one of the clips uh of Yomi Park talking to Prager, and it's on their PragerU Shorts channel, is specifically about brainwashing at U.S. universities. Because after she got to America, she went to Columbia, very prestigious university, and she couldn't understand. The US is awesome, freedom is great. Why does everybody here hate America? And this is a favorite topic of Des Prager because he also attended Columbia, and as he says in their back and forth, it's gotten worse, but it wasn't good when I went there. And it's gotten worse because it has gotten more insular. It has gotten more, to your point, more of the hallmarks of something cult-like, of, hey, you've just been separated from your family, and now you're with this new in group, and they all think the same. Is, one of the examples she uses is that she was confused about, one of the professors saying that, what does it mean when a man opens a door for me, a door for you? Oh, well, he's being gentlemanly, he's being nice. No, you have to break that thinking. See, you've been brainwashed. And she's sitting there thinking, yeah, I know, I broke the brainwashing, I know what brainwashing is, I lived it. And you've been brainwashed. That is, white male supremacy. He's
Benevolent
oppressing
misogyny
you.
is what they
Yeah,
call it. Yeah.
he's oppressing you.
Through his
What?
kindness.
And
Yeah.
she was in another class, which was a musical appreciation class, and the professor apologized that they had to learn Western music because that's white colonial oppression. And she's sitting there looking around going, why am I the only one not raising my hand about who thinks that Western civilization is bad? And and Prager, who loves classical music and is actually a conductor, there was a big stink several years ago because he got to conduct the LA Symphony, and the leftists were outraged. He's like, it's music. But he makes the point that South Korea is one of the greatest bastions for classical music in the world, not because they're Western, but because they appreciate excellence. And they recognized, oh, this is great. It doesn't matter where it came from. It doesn't matter who made it. And as Yomi Park points out, well, wait, we have traditional music in Korea, and we study that, and you even teach that stuff here, and we're supposed to appreciate that. Why can't we also appreciate Mozart and Beethoven? Because that's white colonial oppression. And see, you've been brainwashed. And rather than that clip, I want to show this one because it's a short. And it's also this one's pretty emotional because it gets personal, and it shows the effect of what that kind of insular, cult-like, rigid thinking, and to Kaufman's point of the effect of this toxic empathy.
North Korea and China Cultural Revolution is where people get shamed in front of everybody for the things they are not responsible for. It's exactly like we're this white gear thing, right? Because I spoke out against the regime punished 3 generations of my life, my family, both my mom and my dad's side, because of me. And now They call my son, who's half white. He's guilty. He's privileged because his ancestors perhaps owned slaves. And that punishing people for something collective guilt and not seeing people as an individual, that is the evil. And I think this is what we are going into. It's not a compassion. It is something that actively we need to fight against. This is
The cognitive dissonance required to say, you know, marginalized groups must be protected at all cost. And now we are going to abuse this person who, how do you get more marginalized than, at least here, she's a minority. She's from an oppressive totalitarian culture. She was brainwashed. She was trafficked as a sex slave. And then she finally made it to freedom. And now she is of the opinion that you're going down the road to get to what I left. And now you're going to abuse her. You're going to, you know, speak ill of a child. And, you know, this is personal for me too, because my son has kind of a dark sense of humor about it of, you know, where do I fit into the wokeness because I'm only half white. So am I only half evil? I guess so.
And do I need to get him a 333 shirt?
Exactly. But so, and yet these people reflexively automatically do this and have no problem with it. You know, in the same way that when he was running for governor of California, Larry Elder was the blackface of white supremacy. What? That makes no sense whatsoever. Well, it doesn't have to make sense because, again, this is a bottom up toxic empathy. There is no structure here. Now, there are people who will use these kinds of Marxist ideologies to create a post hoc reason, but ultimately, what it is about is it is about power and control. As she says, this is exactly what happens now in North Korea. This is exactly what happened in the Cultural Revolution in China, and yet we're doing it and doing it willingly. And
Yeah,
again, it comes from the universities.
and that's why there's the double talk too. I'll call it. Isn't that what they used in 1984? Double talk, double speak.
Double speak, yeah.
Yeah, double speak. Because they'll use words and use language on purpose. Because what are they called? The critical theories, right? Critical theories automatically invoke in a normal person that's just hearing it for the first time, critical thinking. Critical thinking would be taking in the data, taking in everything, processing it, and trying to come up with the best answer. No, the critical consciousness that comes from the critical theories is a new schema to look at the world through. As we talked about, if you have a schema, you see things through that lens. If you're Catholic, you see things as a Catholic. If you are Buddhist, you see things as a Buddhist. If you are male, you see things from the masculine typically, right? If you are a female, you typically see things from the feminine. So it affects the way you see things. If you are trained to have a new critical consciousness, of course, you're going to see it through that lens. And for what those that are just hearing that term for the first time, that is there are layers of oppression everywhere. And in the case of the United States, and what Yoimi Park was talking about there is we are trying to sustain a system of whiteness. And if that makes no sense to you, I'm glad. Keep that naivety a little bit longer, but know that it exists and know that that's what these people are saying when they say racism. That's why Larry Elder can be the black face of white supremacy because he is trying to sustain a system because he's conservative. Conservatives sustain things, right? He is trying to sustain the current system, which to them is racist and white supremacist. So if you are trying to sustain the system, you are a white supremacist, no matter what skin color you have. So if Now all of a sudden it makes sense to you. You're welcome. But yeah, it is a new schema. That's why people who are prone to rigid thinking are actually the worst when it comes to this. Because if you adopt that new way of thinking, then you are going to be more likely to see the world through that. And if you see the world through that ideology, then, oh, things like microaggressions make sense. I looked at you crossways. It wasn't that I just got a text that something really annoying happened. It wasn't that maybe I just got resting bitch face. It wasn't that my gut hurts. I've got ulcerative colitis and it's really bothering me right now. And you just happened to be in the direction I looked. No, it wasn't any of those things. It was I looked at you that way because of your skin color or your gender or your sex or whatever, or the way you dress or any of those things. So yeah, if you look at the world through that schema, you see these things because that's what it determines what you see. It determines what you pay attention to.
And if you are not going to expose yourself to outside thoughts, or if you are prohibited, whether directly forcefully, like in North Korea, or through intense societal pressure, like in a university, if you are prohibited from exposing yourself to other ideas and other ways of thinking, that right hemisphere is never going to stretch. It's never going to work. And the whole point of this, of what you're talking about, of whether they do this on purpose or not, is they are basically taking Beck's thesis and inverting it. Because no, we're only going to focus on the terrible. We're only going to focus on all of the awful things that are or could be. We're not going to let you look at reality. And just because it is true that your perception is your reality, that does not mean it is objective reality. You can have intense anxiety because you think this group is out to get you. Okay, well, as far as you're concerned, they are. That doesn't mean it's true.
It's the kernel of truth approach, where yes, I did look your direction, I did make a dirty face, but that's where it ended.
Ugh.
All the other things were things that you implied in your own head.
So I'd forgotten I wanted to talk about this last week when it was fresh, and so I'll do it now. Is so here. Let me bash my own side for a little bit of. So way back in our first Sunday school episode, I talked about why I'm hesitant to get too deep into theology and why when I do talk about it, I'm very careful about what I think and what I'm sure about. So if I'm not sure, I'm going to say, well, I think, and if I'm really fuzzy on it, I might not just say it out loud at all because I don't want to inadvertently lead someone into heresy. And the example I used of, look, this is black and white straight out of the scripture. Um, you know, I have yet to have a Mormon explain to me how they reconcile Galatians chapter 1 with their faith. And so I don't know what that means because I'm not the ultimate judge with a capital J, but I can say that's heresy, that's wrong. That's not right. So because that is so black and white. Well, a couple weeks ago, someone who had that kernel of thought, that same kernel of thought that I have, he somehow let it fester into rigidness that led to insanity. And he became convinced that they weren't just wrong, they weren't just heretical, they worship the Antichrist. Like literally, that is what he had said to people, is that they worship the Antichrist and they are going to bring about the Antichrist and the end times. And that led him to shoot up and set fire to an LDS church
Mm.
in, was it Minnesota or Michigan? Michigan, I think.
Michigan, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I don't I didn't follow up, so I don't remember what the casualties were, but it was another one of these. What the heck is going on in our culture and what is wrong with us? But then to make matters worse, there were a lot of people on the right who felt that that was the time to point out that Mormons aren't really Christians. When people were expressing sympathy and, our prayers go out to you and your family, and how if that is your time to say, yeah, those aren't real Christians though. How are you any different? How are you any better? How are you any moral than all the people that say, well, I don't condone violence, but Charlie Kirk was a bad person and he brought it on himself.
Mm-hmm.
You are no different. You are trapped in a similar brand of rigid thinking that led this person to commit this heinous act. You just haven't done the heinous act yet. And I think the yet is important there.
They may be too cowardly to, but
But even if you won't do it yourself, that
if you
that
support it, you will have more people rise up and do it. Yeah.
exactly. Um, if you are silent about the heinous, back to Yomi Park, if you are silent about it, then you're only going to encourage it. But then how much more will you encourage it if you're saying, well, yeah, he's got a point. Well, yeah, I wouldn't have done that, but he's got a point. Um, and so I've said this before, and I can't remember if I said this while we were recording when I used the example of, you know, I'm not. There's a lot of Catholic doctrine. I'm like, I don't know about that, but it's not quite as black and white to me as uh, Mormonism. So I won't say flat out that is heretical, that is contradictory. I'll just go, I'm not sure about that. That's why I don't do that. But so if you're in my tribe, if you will, if you're on the same side I am as far as that goes, you can say I don't agree with your faith. But one thing you can't say about either of those denominations, their faith is not dead because they go out and they do stuff. They do a lot of stuff. Here in America, there are a lot of hospitals that are Saint someone or other because they were started by a Catholic organization. There are a lot of adoption agencies that are run by Catholic churches and organizations. Mormons do a lot with their faith. Whether you agree with their faith or not, it's not dead. How's yours? Do you do a tenth of what they do?
Mm-hmm.
You person who's out there saying, yeah, well, they're not Christians, so it's okay. To that point, this
Yeah, I
this
always
choked.
feel bad when they're biking up to my door because I'm like, I appreciate your gusto, but this is gonna not be the conversation you want.
Yeah, yeah. Well, uh, this actually got me choked up a little bit when I heard this. Of Glenn Beck talked about this last week sometime. I just listened to. I don't have time to listen to his whole show, but he puts out a clip show. So he puts out his whole podcast after his radio show, and then he'll put out a 30-minute version that I'll sometimes listen to. And he read a story about the shooting, and apparently the perpetrator, who I don't remember if he was killed by police or if he killed himself, but he left behind two young kids and a wife. And one of those children has some pretty severe medical issues. The Mormon Church has started a GoFundMe for those children. The children of the man who went in there and shot up their church and set it on fire. That
That's beyond turning the other cheek.
exactly.
Yeah.
That is some prime unrigid thinking right there. And so if you're going to besmirch them because you disagree with their faith while they're doing that, that should cut you to the quick, as the saying goes. That should pierce your heart and make you say, maybe I need to take a look in the mirror because maybe, the the British. I don't even remember the British comedy show. Was it? It wasn't Blackadder. Are we the baddies? You know, take a look and ask yourself: Am I the baddie, or am I contributing to the baddies?
Or at the least, do I just have a blind spot?
Yeah.
At the minimum, at the minimum. Do I have this thing that I could improve on that I'm not paying attention to because it's not the big thing. It's not the I keep using the word the
Mhm.
scheme that governs my life.
Which again is not to say. So here's an example that I'll end on of talking about self-reflection and exposing yourself to different thoughts and different ways of thinking is because I'm a political nerd. People will often ask me, "Well, you never change your mind on anything. You're, blah blah." Well, here's something I've changed my mind on, which is the death penalty. Now, morally speaking, I'm not opposed to the death penalty. It's in the Bible. We've done it for millennia. It, you can make a moral case for, after due process, taking the life of someone who has committed a heinous crime. However, in listening to other people talk about it and in thinking about it, I came to the conclusion, yeah, but I don't think we can trust ourselves and on the government of we the people to do it, especially
Yeah,
not to,
I'd say
not today.
I'd say I couldn't trust humans to be wise enough to administer it correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we cannot trust ourselves to administer it with true justice and fairness, then we shouldn't do it. And
Yeah.
I would not have reached that. Now, I did not change my principles, but I did change my mind in the application of those principles. And that would not have happened if I just stayed in my own bubble.
hmm Yeah, I just don't trust humans to not use it for revenge. I mean, we heard it right after the Kirk thing.
Mhm.
Utah State Governor, he's said some good things afterwards as well, but when he did, it just seemed unnecessary compared in the context of the entire speech when he said, "We're in Utah, we still have the death penalty.
Mhm.
We don't need that right now."
Mhm.
But he was satisfying that urge for revenge amongst the people who were wronged by it, realistically. And the sad thing is that that's probably less so his family than a lot of the other people that
Yeah.
were around the
There
situation.
there is a reason why we allow victim statements at sentencing, but they don't get to decide. It's still the jury that decides what the sentence
hmm
is.
Which I hate that. I like that system exists. I hate that they're making it so public now because people are coming out and trying to get zingers and stuff during these. And I'm
Mhm.
like, are you a victim or are you trying to be famous right now?
We don't need the video and the audio. We have the transcript if you want to read it. The,
Yeah.
the court transcripts are public. Yeah.
hmm
All right. Well, we've got to get back to real life things, and we don't need to flagellate this deceased equine any further. So we were talking about our late great calculus teacher who passed just earlier this year, I think. Grady Galkey, great guy. He had great sayings like "flagellate the deceased equine."
hmm
Um, so we will end it there. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I think my main contribution was there in the middle, just trying to get get people to understand this is how the process works, and this is how
Mhm.
different groups do it, and this is how your own inner self-reflection can either help or hurt the situation. If you're someone who is I don't want to use the same words again. I want to try to describe it. If you're someone who once you're on something, you're just like straight as an arrow, you just go straight through. maybe on some of these more complex issues, don't shoot so fast.
Mm.
Maybe on something simple, if you've got a task to do, boom, you're the perfect person for it. But if you have that mentality that just gets the job done every time, and you can focus and do this and that, you probably have that same thing on a grander scale. So take a breath with the big stuff, the stuff that have so many working parts that there's no way you can know everything about it. And
Mhm.
then in that, realize how other people can use that trait in you.
Which is why we have been harping on get out and do new things. Do new things, see new things, read new things, talk to new people, because that is how you break out of that bubble. That is how you break out of that rigidity. And even if you don't feel like you're too rigid in your thinking, it's how you check to make sure.
Yeah, that's an important point. I'm glad you said that, and I'm mad I didn't think of it. But yeah, sometimes just awareness. Awareness is the first step.
Mhm.
And you can't be aware if you're always in the same situation. If you're in the bubble, you never know what, like you said, if you're in North Korea, you don't know what's outside North Korea. We've got many a movie about this.
Mm.
There was a newer one for the kids out there, Divergent. It's not horrible. It's actually not horrible, but they're all in an enclosed area, and they're always told there's nothing outside of this. There's nothing outside of this. Oh my gosh, some people went outside of it and they found some stuff. So it's Plato's cave all over again.
Mhm. All right. Well, we will talk a little bit more about this, but with a fictional example, because I was talking to my brother yesterday about this, about how stories matter and why they matter, because they contextualize things, and because I think back to what I've been harping on since I've been reading Beck's book is I think it forces both the two hemispheres of your brain to work together in the way that they're supposed to. And that is why the lesson of a story sticks so much more than a PowerPoint presentation. And so we'll talk a little bit about, you know, this character and this fictional example of how rigid thinking was broken.
All right, sounds good. We'll see y'all next time.